shelter jaguar started crying when he recognized man standing in front of him. The silence inside the Arizona Wildlife Rescue Center was absolute. Even the usual hum of air conditioning seemed to fade as every person in the observation room stood frozen, their breaths caught somewhere between disbelief and wonder. Outside the reinforced glass enclosure, a massive jaguar moved with the fluid grace of shadow and muscle, its black rosette coat gleaming under the afternoon sun. This was Onyx, 8 years old, 300 pounds of raw power and barely contained wildness. For the 6 months since his arrival at the center, he had been a study in isolation and fury. Staff members had learned to approach his enclosure with extreme caution. Always in pairs, never making direct eye contact, he paced constantly, a restless king in an unwanted kingdom. His amber gold eyes burning with something that looked like rage mixed with profound sorrow. But today, something had changed. Today, Onyx had stopped pacing. Today, he stood perfectly still at the glass, his massive head tilted slightly to one side. His eyes locked on a single figure standing outside. The man was 70 years old, his face weathered like desert stone, his silver hair still thick despite his age. He wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. And his hands, calloused and scarred from decades of outdoor work, pressed gently against the glass. Samuel Carter, known to everyone as simply Sam, had driven 7 hours from Tucson to stand in this spot, guided by a phone call from Dr. Patricia Hammond, the center's director, who had said only, "Sam, you need to come see this jaguar. There's something about him." The staff members watched in stunned silence as Onyx took another step closer to the glass. His enormous paw, easily the size of a dinner plate, lifted slowly and pressed against the barrier, directly opposite Sam's weathered hand. Then came the sound that made several people gasp aloud. It was a growl, yes, but unlike any growl they had ever heard from this fierce creature. It was deep, resonant, and impossibly soft, like a whisper carried across silent desert dunes. It held no threat, no warning. Instead, it carried something that seemed almost impossible from an animal that had spent months refusing human contact recognition. Longing, and perhaps even joy. Sam's voice, when it came, was thick with emotion. "Onyx, is that really you, boy?" The jaguar's response was immediate and unmistakable. His head tilted further, and then, in a gesture that defied everything the rescue center staff thought they knew about wild animals, Onyx lifted his other paw and moved it slowly from side to side against the glass. A clear, deliberate wave, like greeting an old friend after years of separation. Dr. Hammond found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "How is this possible, Sam? How do you know this jaguar?" Sam didn't take his eyes off Onyx as he answered, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Because I raised him. Because 7.5 years ago, I found a 6-month-old cub trapped in the ashes of a wildfire, and I named him Onyx, because for 2 years, we were family." The story Sam told him over the next hour seemed impossible, the kind of tale that belonged in movies rather than real life. Yet every word was true. 7.5 years earlier, Samuel Carter had been a senior ranger at Coronado National Park, approaching mandatory retirement at 61, but still as tough and capable as men half his age. That June, a massive wildfire had torn through the southern section of the park, consuming thousands of acres of precious habitat. Sam had been part of the emergency response team, working 18-hour days to create fire breaks and rescue stranded wildlife. On the 4th day, exhausted and smoke-darkened, Sam had been surveying a burned section near Cave Creek when he heard a weak, pitiful mewling coming from a cluster of charred juniper trees. His first thought had been a mountain lion cub, but when he carefully moved aside the blackened branches, he found something far rarer, a jaguar cub, no more than 6 months old, its beautiful coat covered in soot and ash, its tiny body trembling with fear and pain. The most distinctive feature was a Y-shaped wound on its left ear, still bleeding, likely caused by falling debris or perhaps a desperate escape through thorny brush. Jaguars were critically endangered in Arizona, with fewer than a dozen confirmed individuals in the entire state. Sam knew the protocol: contact wildlife services immediately. Maintain distance. Let the professionals handle it. But the cub was dying. Its breathing was labored. Its eyes glazed with shock. And the nearest wildlife rehabilitation facility was 4 hours away. Sam made a decision that would change his life forever. He carefully wrapped the cub in his jacket, carried it back to his truck, and drove straight to the ranger station. Dr. Marcus Lee, the park's wildlife veterinarian, had been dubious at first. "Sam, you know we can't keep a jaguar here, even a cub. The regulations alone." But Sam had interrupted him with quiet determination. "Marcus, look at him. He won't survive a 4-hour transport. We stabilize him here, then we figure out the rest." Marcus had looked at the tiny, suffering creature in Sam's arms and nodded. "Okay, but this is on you, Sam. I'll help, but you're responsible." For the first 3 days, the cub's survival hung by a thread. Sam barely slept, bottle feeding it every 2 hours with a special formula Marcus prepared, cleaning its wounds, keeping it warm in a makeshift den he created in a storage room at the ranger station. He named it Onyx, for the way its coat shimmered like black opal when clean, and for the strength he hoped the cub would show. Against all odds, Onyx survived. By the second week, he was eating regularly and beginning to show personality: curious, playful, but also remarkably gentle for a predator. What happened over the next 2 years remained one of the most extraordinary human-animal bonds Sam had ever witnessed. Even among his decades working with wildlife, Onyx didn't just tolerate Sam's presence, he actively sought it out, forming attachments that shouldn't have been possible for a wild jaguar. Sam developed a system of signals to communicate with Onyx, partly for practical reasons and partly because the bond between them seemed to demand more sophisticated interaction than simple training. Bowing the head meant contentment or happiness. A single paw tap meant a desire to play. A gentle reach with extended claws meant a request for attention or food. Most remarkably, every single morning, Onyx would approach Sam and carefully extend his paw to touch Sam's hand, a greeting ritual that never varied. Wildlife biologists from across the Southwest came to study this unusual relationship. Dr. Angela Thornton from the University of Arizona spent 3 months documenting Onyx's behavior. Writing in her research paper, "The bond between Carter and the juvenile jaguar displays characteristics typically observed only in highly social species. The jaguar demonstrates clear recognition of individual identity, responds to subtle human emotional cues, and initiates interaction using learned symbolic gestures. This challenges our understanding of feline social cognition." But Sam knew something the scientists missed. It wasn't about cognition or social learning. It was simpler and more profound than that. Onyx loved him, and Sam loved Onyx, in the pure, uncomplicated way that transcended species boundaries. They were family. By the time Onyx turned 2.5 years old, he weighed nearly 200 pounds and was becoming increasingly difficult to house safely at the ranger station. Sam had known this day would come, but the reality of it felt like losing a son. Federal wildlife officials, who had been remarkably tolerant of the irregular situation, now insisted Onyx needed to be released back into wild habitat or transferred to a facility equipped for large predators. Sam chose release. He couldn't bear the thought of Onyx living behind bars. Working with wildlife biologists, they selected a remote area in the southern section of Coronado National Forest, with good water access, plenty of prey animals, and minimal human presence. The day of the release, Sam drove Onyx to the site personally, sitting in the back of the transport vehicle with his hand pressed against the cage, talking softly the whole way. When they opened the cage door, Onyx didn't immediately run. He stepped out cautiously, looked around at the wild forest that was now his home, then turned back to Sam. He approached slowly, pressed his massive head against Sam's chest one final time, then turned and vanished into the undergrowth. Sam stood there for nearly an hour, tears streaming down his face, before finally driving away. The story should have ended there. Released jaguars don't maintain contact with humans. But Onyx was different over the following year. Sam received dozens of reports from other rangers and hikers. A large male jaguar with a Y-shaped scar on its ear had been spotted watching people from a distance. Always watching, never threatening, just observing. Sam knew. Onyx was checking on him, maintaining the bond the only way a wild animal could. Sam began hiking specific trails on his days off, and sometimes, just sometimes, he would catch a glimpse of rosette-patterned fur in the shadows, a flash of amber eyes watching from a ridge. Once, he found fresh jaguar tracks outside his cabin, and his heart had soared with the certain knowledge that Onyx had been there, checking that Sam was safe. Then, 2 years after the release, Onyx vanished completely. At first, Sam told himself it was natural. Jaguars are solitary, wide-ranging. Onyx had probably expanded his territory, found a mate, was living the wild life he was meant for. But weeks became months, and there were no more sightings, no more tracks. Other rangers stopped mentioning the friendly jaguar with the marked ear. Sam tried to convince himself that this was good news, that Onyx was simply being a proper wild jaguar now. But deep in his gut, he felt something was wrong. His fears were confirmed when news broke about a major wildlife trafficking operation working the U.S.-Mexico border. Federal agents had broken up a ring that had been capturing exotic animals or for illegal sale mountain lions, jaguars, Mexican wolves, even bears. The animals were smuggled across borders, sold to private collectors, or worse, used in illegal fighting rings where wealthy gamblers bet on animal combat. Sam felt sick. He contacted every agency, every organization he could think of, sharing Onyx's description and the distinctive Y-shaped ear scar. Most were polite, but offered little hope. Trafficked animals were notoriously difficult to track, often transported across multiple states and sold through encrypted networks. But Sam couldn't accept that. He was 67 years old, recently retired, and he had nothing but time. He began his search. The first lead came 3 months later, from an amateur wildlife photographer named Jessica Martinez, who posted photos on social media from the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico. Among her collection was a distant shot of a male jaguar drinking from a stream, and clearly visible on the left ear was a Y-shaped marking. Sam felt his heart nearly explode. He drove to New Mexico immediately, spent 2 weeks combing the area with Jessica's help, but found nothing. The jaguar was gone. The second lead was darker. Dr. Raymond Foster, a veterinarian in El Paso, Texas, contacted Sam after seeing his search posts online. Dr. Foster had been called to an abandoned warehouse 6 months earlier by authorities investigating animal cruelty reports. Inside, they had found an illegal breeding operation holding several exotic animals in horrific conditions. Among them was a badly injured jaguar, male, approximately 4 years old, with extensive wounds from apparent fighting. "I didn't connect it until I saw your posts," Dr. Foster told Sam over the phone. "But yes, I remember now. The left ear had an old scar, sort of Y-shaped. The jaguar was terrified, defensive, but also utterly defeated. When I approached to treat him, he made this sound, this low, raspy growl that honestly sounded like he was crying. I've been a vet for 30 years, and I've never heard an animal make a sound like that." The facility had been raided and shut down, but by the time Dr. Foster thought to check again, all the animals had been relocated by federal authorities, their final destinations classified for their protection. Or so the official story went. Sam didn't believe it for a second. He suspected the trafficking network had simply moved Onyx before authorities could properly document everything. The final lead came from an unlikely source, a long-haul truck driver named Pete Morrison, who heard about Sam's search through a podcast interview. Pete contacted Sam privately, his voice nervous on the phone. "Look, I'm not proud of this, but about a year ago, I took a broom, no questions asked. Good money drove a trailer from a border town in Mexico to outside Reno, Nevada. I was told the cargo was machine parts. But when I stopped for fuel in Arizona, I heard sounds from the back, animal sounds. One of them, I swear it was a big cat, made this sound I can't forget. It was this low, mournful growl, but it went on, and it sounded like the animal was crying. Like actual crying. I didn't know what to do. I needed the money, and I convinced myself I was imagining things. But I wasn't. Was I?" Sam felt rage and hope in equal measure. Nevada, Reno, illegal fighting operations. It made terrible sense. He thanked Pete Morrison, who promised to cooperate with any federal investigation. Then Sam began planning his next move. He was 69 years old. His savings were modest, His health, while generally good, wasn't what it used to be. He had high blood pressure and a knee that ached in cold weather. But none of that mattered. Onyx was out there, suffering, and Sam would crawl across broken glass to reach him if necessary. The search that followed became the stuff of legend in wildlife conservation circles. Though Sam never sought attention for it, he spent his own money traveling across Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and eventually Nevada, following any lead no matter how slim. He hiked hundreds of miles across brutal desert terrain, climbed mountains under blazing suns, slept in his aging truck or in cheap motels when he could afford them. The physical toll was immense. He lost 30 pounds. His knees swelled constantly. In Albuquerque, while hiking a remote canyon following a reported sighting, he experienced severe chest pains and shortness of breath. A pair of young hikers found him collapsed on the trail and called for emergency services. At the hospital, doctors told him he had suffered a mild heart attack. They insisted he rest, probably for months. He checked himself out after 2 days. The traffickers learned about him too. Someone was asking too many questions, getting too close. One night, while camped outside Alamogordo, New Mexico, Sam woke to find his tent on fire. He barely escaped, losing most of his gear. A note weighted down by a rock outside the fire's radius read simply, "Stop looking, old man, or you'll disappear too." Sam reported it to authorities, but without solid evidence. There was little they could do. He bought new gear and kept searching. His determination began attracting attention. Someone created a social media page called Help Sam Find Onyx, and the story went viral. Donations poured in money, equipment, food, offers of help. Wildlife advocates, animal lovers, and ordinary people moved by the story of an old man's loyalty to the animal he had saved contributed what they could. Among the volunteers was Dr. Elena Rivera, a 45-year-old Mexican-American veterinarian from Tucson who specialized in exotic animal care. She had followed Sam's search from the beginning and finally reached out directly. "Mr. Carter, I'd like to help. I'm between jobs right now. I have field experience, and frankly, I think you need someone watching your back." Sam tried to refuse, not wanting to put anyone else at risk, but Elena was insistent. "You found Onyx when he needed you," she said firmly. "Now let someone help you find him again." Elena brought more than medical expertise. She had contacts throughout the underground animal trade from her years treating confiscated animals, and she knew which questions to ask and who might provide answers. She also made sure Sam took his heart medication, ate properly, and didn't push himself to the point of collapse. Another key ally was Noah Red Sky, a 28-year-old Navajo man from northern Arizona who worked as a wilderness guide. Noah had grown up hearing stories from his grandfather about jaguars as sacred spirits, symbols of strength and transformation. When he heard about Sam's search, he felt called to help. "In my culture," Noah told Sam when they first met, "when a jaguar chooses a human, it's a spiritual bond that transcends the physical world. You didn't just raise Onyx, you were meant to find each other, and you're meant to find him again." Noah's tracking skills proved invaluable. He could read signs in the landscape that Sam, despite his ranger experience, would have missed. More importantly, Noah drove, handling the endless miles while Sam rested, and his calm, spiritual perspective helped keep Sam's hope alive during the darkest moments. After 10 months of searching, of false leads and crushing disappointments, of physical suffering and moments where Sam wondered if he would die before finding Onyx, the break finally came. A Nevada State police officer named Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, who had been following the search online, contacted Sam with information she probably shouldn't have shared. There was a property outside Reno, officially registered as a private ranch, that had been under sporadic investigation for suspected illegal gambling. Neighbors had reported strange animal sounds, including the roaring of large cats. Authorities suspected it might be a fire camp, but they hadn't been able to get enough evidence for a warrant. Sam, Elena, and Noah drove to Nevada immediately. They scouted the property from a distance, using binoculars from a nearby ridge. The ranch was large, well-guarded, with high fences and security cameras. But on the third night of surveillance, the wind carried sounds across the desert animal cries. Human shouting, the unmistakable roar of a big cat. Sam felt his hands tremble. He knew that roar, even after all these years, he knew it. They couldn't raid the property themselves. Sam contacted FBI wildlife crime units, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and every law enforcement contact Elena and Noah had. He provided everything: Pete Morrison's testimony, Dr. Foster's records, the circumstantial evidence they had gathered, and his own expertise identifying the Jaguar sounds coming from the property. It took another agonizing 2 weeks. But finally, a multi-agency task force assembled. The property owner was Derek Vance, a wealthy businessman with connections in Nevada politics. He had no prior record, which was why he had evaded serious investigation. But he had made enemies, and when federal authorities came with warrants, several former employees turned witness. Describing the illegal animal fighting operation, Vance ran for high-stakes gamblers. Sam insisted on being present for the raid, though he was technically a civilian. Special Agent Aaron Briggs, leading the FBI team, reluctantly agreed, placing Sam with Elena and Noah behind the tactical teams. "Stay back, stay safe, and for God's sake, don't interfere," Briggs warned. The raid happened at dawn. Federal agents swarmed the property, arresting Vance and 12 others. In the converted barn behind the main house, they found the fight ring, a large, fenced arena surrounded by stadium seating, currently empty but stained and reeking of blood. Around the perimeter were cages, and in those cages were animals: 3 mountain lions, 2 wolves, a bear, and in the largest cage at the far end, a jaguar. Sam saw him before anyone else could stop him. He broke away from Elena and Noah, running across the barn floor despite Agent Briggs's shouts. The jaguar in the cage was emaciated, its coat dull and scarred, its body covered in wounds in various stages of healing. This animal had been forced to fight, again and again, its wild spirit broken by cruelty. It cowered in the corner of the cage, trembling, its eyes empty of everything except fear. But on the left ear, clearly visible even through the matted fur, was a Y-shaped scar. Sam fell to his knees in front of the cage, tears streaming down his face. "Onyx," he whispered. "Oh God, Onyx, what did they do to you?" The jaguar didn't respond. It pressed itself harder against the back of the cage, a low growl of warning in its throat. It didn't recognize Sam, or perhaps it recognized nothing but pain now, trusted nothing but its own suffering. Sam felt his heart breaking. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He had found Onyx, but he had found him too late. Elena approached carefully, medical bag in hand, but Sam held up a hand to stop her. An idea was forming, desperate and probably foolish. But he had to try. He took a deep breath and began to sing. His voice was rough, cracked with emotion and age, but the song was one he had sung 1,000 times 12 years ago, "Amazing Grace." It had been Onyx's lullaby, the song Sam sang during those first frightening nights at the ranger station. The song that calmed the terrified cub when storms raged or strange sounds frightened him. The response wasn't immediate. For long seconds, nothing happened. The jaguar remained pressed against the cage wall, trembling, lost in its trauma. Federal agents stood frozen, watching this strange scene unfold. Noah had his hand on Elena's shoulder, both of them hardly daring to breathe. Then, slowly, the jaguar's head lifted, the growl changed pitch, becoming deeper, fuller, tinged with something that sounded almost like a question. The amber eyes, dull moments before, began to focus. The massive body stopped trembling. And then, impossibly, the jaguar took one step forward, then another. Sam kept singing, his voice growing stronger even as tears poured down his face. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. That saved a wretch like me." Onyx took another step, his eyes now locked on Sam's face. Recognition was dawning, fighting through the fog of pain and fear. "I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see." Onyx reached the front of the cage, his scarred, massive paw extended through the bars, not in aggression, but in the old gesture, the morning greeting from a lifetime ago. Sam carefully pressed his weathered hand against that paw, and the connection completed a circuit that had been broken for years. The sound Onyx made then wasn't a growl or a roar. It was something no one present had ever heard from a jaguar before: a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from the animal's very soul. Part purr, part cry, part song. The Jaguar pressed forward against the cage bars, desperate to get closer, and when Elena carefully unlocked the cage door, Onyx emerged not with violence but with desperate longing. He walked straight to Sam, his gait unsteady from malnutrition and old wounds, and carefully laid his huge head on Sam's shoulder. Sam wrapped his arms around that scarred neck and held on while Onyx made that impossible sound, over and over, a sound of relief and recognition and love that had survived torture and despair. Around them, hardened FBI agents wiped their eyes. Elena and Noah openly wept. Even Agent Briggs, who had seen terrible things in his career, found himself blinking back tears. "Welcome home, Onyx," Sam whispered into the scarred fur. "You're safe now. You're finally safe." The aftermath took months. Derek Vance and his associates faced federal charges for wildlife trafficking, animal cruelty, and running an illegal gambling operation. The other rescued animals were transferred to appropriate facilities. But Onyx presented a unique challenge. He was too traumatized and too habituated to humans to be released back into the wild. Traditional zoos and sanctuaries, while well-meaning, would place him in artificial environments behind bars, and Sam couldn't bear that thought. Onyx had been caged enough. The solution came from an unexpected place. Several wealthy donors who had followed Sam's search reached out with an offer they would fund the creation of a private wildlife sanctuary specifically designed for rescued exotic animals who couldn't be released. The location would be Sam's choice, and he would have full control over its operation. Sam chose a beautiful parcel of land in the Patagonia Mountains of southern Arizona. Not far from where he had worked as a ranger, the property included rolling grasslands, oak woodlands, rocky hillsides, and a year-round creek, with the donated funds and his own remaining savings. Sam built Haven Valley Sanctuary. It wasn't a zoo with cages and viewing platforms. It was as close to natural habitat as possible, with large enclosures designed to look and feel like wild spaces, each tailored to the specific needs of its residents. Onyx's recovery was slow. Dr. Elena Rivera, who had become indispensable during the search, agreed to stay on as the sanctuary's veterinarian. She treated his physical wounds, but the psychological scars took longer. For the first month, Onyx barely ate. He would sometimes wake from sleep with terrifying roars, reliving the trauma of the fighting pit. Sam spent countless hours simply sitting with him, talking, singing, reminding Onyx that he was safe and loved. After 6 months, Onyx began to eat normally again. After 8 months, he started exploring his large enclosure with curiosity rather than fear. After nearly a year, something miraculous happened. He initiated play. Sam had been sitting on a bench in the enclosure, watching Onyx rest in the shade, when the Jaguar suddenly stood, approached, and tapped his paw against Sam's boot. The old signal. "Want to play?" Sam had laughed and cried at the same time. Noah Red Sky, who had become a close friend during the search, accepted Sam's offer to become the sanctuary's operations director. He brought with him a philosophy rooted in Navajo traditions of living in balance with all creatures. "Every animal here is sacred," Noah would tell visitors and volunteers. "They've all suffered at human hands, and it's our privilege to help them heal." Life at Haven Valley Sanctuary settled into a peaceful rhythm. Sam and Elena, who had grown close during their shared mission, discovered that their bond had deepened into something more. They married in a simple ceremony on the sanctuary grounds, surrounded by friends, volunteers, and the animals they cared for. Onyx, in a moment that became part of sanctuary legend, approached during the ceremony and gently pressed his paw against Elena's hand, his way of welcoming her into the family. Everyone laughed through their tears. 3 years after the sanctuary's founding, another rescued Jaguar arrived from Texas. Luna was a 5-year-old female who had been held captive in an illegal circus. She was wary, defensive, and heartbreakingly thin. Sam and Elena worked carefully with her, and gradually, she began to trust. Onyx, meanwhile, showed surprising interest in this new arrival. At first, they were kept in separate but adjacent enclosures, able to see and smell each other but not interact. Their first direct meeting was tense, supervised by Sam, Elena, and Noah. Onyx approached slowly, his body language careful and non-threatening. Luna hissed and backed away, but Onyx persisted, day after day, always gentle, always patient, gradually. Luna's fear transformed into curiosity, then acceptance, and finally, something that looked remarkably like affection. 2 years after Luna's arrival, Sam noticed her abdomen was swollen. Elena confirmed what they had hoped: Luna was pregnant. The birth of the cubs, two healthy males they named Sage and Rio, was one of the most joyful days of Sam's life. He was 74 years old, his hair completely white now, his movements slower, but his spirit felt younger than it had in decades. Watching Onyx with his cubs was a revelation. The Jaguar, who had been broken by cruelty, who had nearly lost all trust in the world, was now a devoted father. He played with Sage and Rio, gentle despite his massive size. He taught them by example how to stalk, how to climb, how to rest in the shade during the hot parts of the day. And Sam, who had never had children of his own, became their grandfather, teaching them the same signals he had taught Onyx all those years ago. The story of Sam and Onyx had spread far beyond southern Arizona. A documentary filmmaker created a feature-length film about their journey. Media outlets across the country covered the sanctuary's work, inspired by their story. A group of activists and philanthropists created the Onyx Foundation, a national nonprofit dedicated to combating wildlife trafficking and supporting rescue operations. Within 5 years, the Onyx Foundation had achieved remarkable success: more than 300 animals rescued from trafficking networks, 12 small sanctuaries established across the United States, over 500 volunteers trained in rescue and rehabilitation, and significant lobbying success that resulted in stronger federal wildlife protection laws. Sam served on the foundation's board, his testimony before Congress helping to secure crucial funding and legislation. But despite all the publicity and success, what mattered most to Sam were the quiet moments, like the late autumn evening when he sat on his wooden porch chair, watching the sun set over the red mountains. The sky was layered in gold and amber, the air cool and clean after the summer heat. Onyx, now 13 years old and moving with the deliberate care of advancing age, approached and gently rested his great head on Sam's lap. Luna and their two grown cubs, Sage and Rio, lay nearby in a loose circle, their presence warm and comforting. Sam stroked the silver-gray fur that now mixed with Onyx's black coat, touched the Y-shaped scar that had started everything, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Onyx," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me what unconditional love and courage truly mean. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to fight for those we love." Onyx made his deep, resonant sound, the one that was part purr, part growl, part song. His amber eyes, dimmed slightly by age but still bright with intelligence and emotion, seemed to say, "Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for giving me a real family." Sage and Rio, hearing their father's sound, bounded over with the enthusiasm of youth. Even though they were now fully grown, they nuzzled Sam, their affection uncomplicated and pure, making sounds that were remarkably similar to their father's. From across the yard, Elena stood watching her unusual family, smiling at the scene: one elderly man, four jaguars, united not by species but by pure, unconditional love. Every morning, the ritual continued as the sun rose over the red mountains, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. Sam would walk out to Onyx's favorite spot under the old mesquite tree, and Onyx, despite his age and the old wounds that sometimes made movement difficult, would come to meet him. The massive paw would lift, extend carefully, and press gently against Sam's weathered hand. The morning greeting, unchanged from their first days together, a promise kept across more than a decade. Sage and Rio would play in the yard, wrestling and chasing, their youth and energy a beautiful contrast to their parents' dignified age. Luna would rest in her preferred spot, sometimes joining the morning ritual, sometimes content to watch her family with calm satisfaction. And Sam, now 75 years old, his body marked by age and the scars of his long search, felt like the happiest man alive, because he understood, finally and completely, the true meaning of life. It wasn't about achievement or recognition or even the important work of the foundation and sanctuary. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was about love, given freely and received gratefully. It was about loyalty that transcended reason and species boundaries. It was about refusing to give up on those who needed you, even when the odds seemed impossible. It was about the bonds we forge that make us who we are meant to be. And it was about knowing, with absolute certainty, that it's never too late to fight for what matters, never too late to begin again, never too late to find your way home or to help someone else find theirs. As the morning sun climbed higher, warming the desert earth, Sam looked at Onyx and saw not just a jaguar, but a mirror of his own journey from loss to rescue, from despair to hope, from loneliness to belonging. Two unlikely souls who had saved each other, who had proven that love, real love, knows no boundaries of species or circumstance. Onyx leaned into Sam's touch, his massive body relaxed and content, his deep purring sound vibrating through the morning air. In that moment, everything that had come before, all the pain and struggle and fear, felt worth it because they had made it through, together, and they had created something beautiful from the ashes of their separate, suffering of family, a sanctuary, a legacy of hope. The desert wind carried their peace across the mountains, a testament to the unbreakable bond between a man and a jaguar, and to the transformative power of love that refuses to surrender. Every rescue begins with a heartbeat that refuses to give up. We're grateful you chose to listen to this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a simple like or subscribe means the world to us.